My name is Richard Heath. I am a landscape architect with Lockhart Garrett, and today I would like to talk to you about building with nature, just to provide a brief overview and an introduction to the standard. So essentially what I'm going to do is go through what green infrastructure is, what building with nature is, what the point of it is, how it works, and some key messages for you. So first, I'd just like to cover off the basics of what green infrastructure actually means, so everybody really understands what we're talking about. So if you think of our towns and villages and cities and roads as forming a grey infrastructure network through the country, then the green infrastructure network is the public footpaths, the road verges, the hedges, providing linkages to what we call nodes such as parkland, woodland, reservoirs, and these can be of any size. And what they do is provide three key functions. They either provide space for nature, they provide space for people, or they provide natural processes. Such as flood alleviation, carbon sinking, etc. Now, good green infrastructure provides at least two of these, if not all of them. So if you think of all components within this green infrastructure network as providing at least one of those elements, then you're probably on the right track to understanding what green infrastructure is. So building with nature. Building with nature is basically a new standard for the assessment of green infrastructure. Now, assessment is perhaps the wrong term. If you think of the role of the assessor as more of a mentor or a guide through the design process and through the process of delivering a development scheme, you're more likely to be on the right track. Now, building with nature was a collaboration between Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust and the University of West of England, and they've prepared a set of standards or criteria with which to review the provision of green infrastructure within new developments. So in a nutshell, what that means is you have this set of scoring criteria or statements, which allows an objective review of the provision of GI. It's voluntary. It's not like the biodiversity impact assessment, which is likely to be mandatory very soon, which means that it, in a way, carries a little bit more weight. And I'll explain that in a little while. It's a meaningful assessment, which means that if we take an initial review of a scheme and feel that it couldn't be considered for building with nature assessment, in other words, we don't feel that it has the necessary requirements and the necessary attitude, then we wouldn't put it forward for assessment. So that gives it some weight. And one of the most important things about the building with nature assessment is that it's backed up post-construction. So it ensures that what is stated within the planning pack, within the design and access statement, within all of the with all of the proposals is actually delivered on site, and that is checked. So what's the point? It's not mandatory, but there has to be a reason for it. So the reason is quite simple. It shows good design practice. It shows a landscape-led approach, which in turn encourages placemaking, ensures that the locale and the community are considered through the design process. Because stakeholders understand the weight and the validity of building with nature, it carries a lot of weight with them, and it helps the planning process. Because the building with nature assessor is on hand to help to steer the design, it also helps limit abortive time. It steers the design process, and it limits having to go back and redo things. In addition to that, it ensures future-proofing of the development, and it ensures that as spaces become more urbanized, there is still space within them for nature. So we're not squeezing nature out into the margins. So what's the difference between building with nature and biodiversity impact assessment? Well, it's quite simple. Biodiversity impact assessment, for a start, is mandatory. Secondly, it only reviews the ecological provision of a scheme. Now, what biodiversity impact assessment does is it looks at a pre and post site analysis. So it looks at the site before the development, and then it looks at the proposals of what's after, and it uses a metric to come up with a score to say whether there is a net gain or a net loss in ecology. Building with nature is different, because building with nature, for a start, is not mandatory, as I've mentioned. But what building with nature does is it doesn't look at the baseline of the site. It looks at the evidence of the development proposals. So it takes all of the information that is being created to support the planning application, and that becomes the evidence for the building with nature assessment. And I'll go into a little bit more detail of that in a little while. So how building with nature works: you have a set of standards, as I've mentioned. There's 23 of them, and these are split into 4 categories. Now, 5 of them are what are known as the core standards, and these really define the very base provision of green infrastructure to ensure that it's doing what it should be doing as a network. Following that, there are 3 additional thematic groups, which split out into the 3 themes that I mentioned earlier. These are well-being, which is provision for people, space for people; water, which is space for natural processes such as flood retention, carbon sequestration, soil health, etc. And then wildlife, which of course is space for biodiversity. Building with nature has 3 award levels. So for outline applications, these are large strategic sites where you might not have all of the information in detail at planning stage. You can apply for what is called a design accreditation. Now, following that, or for smaller schemes and detailed schemes, you can then apply for good or full accreditation. Now, full accreditation essentially looks at things in a little bit more detail, and as I mentioned earlier, it requires a post-development review as well, to ensure that what was promised has actually been delivered. Now, the full accreditation can be considered good or excellent, depending on how many of the core standards you've met. Now, going back to these standards, as you can see, each of the 3 thematic sections are split 1 to 3 and 4 to 6. Now, the reason for that is that 1 to 3 relate to the good accreditation, and 4 to 6 relate to excellent. Now, in order to reach excellent, you really do need to push the boat out. It's the requirement for green infrastructure is far greater, but it is utterly achievable on pretty much all sites. And of course, there is a sweetener, which is a national award, and so the assessor can put forward specific what they feel exemplar sites, which can go forward, and there's a full award ceremony and all the bells and whistles for that. So I just thought I'd share these. I'm not going to go through all of the questions because that would be death by PowerPoint and nobody wants that. But I did want to just kind of highlight what you're looking at in terms of assessment and what would be considered. So these are the 5 core questions that need to be responded to by all developments going through assessment. These must be a positive answer, and there must be evidence to support these. So number 1 is the very, very basic. It has to be a multifunctional network. In other words, the space for nature, the space for wildlife, and the space for people must be interconnected. You're looking for a network that delivers all of the criteria, or as many criteria as possible within the open space. The second point is that it has to be relevant to its site. It has to enhance the local environment. It has to there has to be baseline that identifies local character features and uses them as part of the design. The third point is to ensure that this assessment of local character features is actually utilised and incorporated within this local context of the design. The fourth point relates to climate change, to ensure that provision is made to minimise environmental impact, looking to enhance soil quality, air quality, looking at trying to slow water down at source, good sud scheme, etc., etc. And the fifth is to ensure that that management and maintenance of the green infrastructure is considered post development and beyond, which is really important. There's no point in delivering decent green infrastructure if it's not going to be maintained. So I discussed evidence earlier and what would be required in order to assess the building with nature standards. So there are a number of different sources that can be used to deliver an evidence base for building with nature. If you like your acronyms, I'm sure you're already trying to figure out what these are. So the top one, Green Infrastructure Parameter Plan, also called a Green Infrastructure Management Plan. There's a Construction Management Plan, Construction Ecological Management Plan, Green Infrastructure Management Plan, Flood Risk Assessment, Design and Access Statement, Landscape and Visual Impact Assessment. It keeps going, it keeps going. There are an awful lot, most of them are abbreviated, but they all can provide evidence towards building with nature. What's important to note here is that you're not doing anything over and above what you would normally do for a planning application. This is all stuff that you're going to provide anyway to support the planning application of the scheme. What building with nature does is it takes this evidence and it reviews it, and it looks for evidence that you will be meeting the criteria required for a building with nature standard. So the key messages to take away essentially is that green infrastructure is essential to the health and longevity of our society. Now, building with nature, what building with nature does, it demonstrates a great attitude towards development. It demonstrates that the applicant has an understanding of the context. It has an understanding of the requirement and the importance of green infrastructure within development. So it helps with sales promotion, having this badge of honor to to say, look, we've done this right, we've done this properly, we've created a space for people and for nature, and we've thought about the longevity of this scheme. This really helps to sell a scheme. It also helps with the planning system, greasing the planning wheels, because the stakeholders understand the gravitas and the importance of this standard. It helps with public exhibitions, stakeholder engagement. It helps with the project team collaboration, cohesive design development, and it helps limit that abortive time throughout the design process, where things are going back and forth and tweaking and turning, because all of that costs money and all of that comes off the bottom line of a development. So this is a very, very useful tool in the planning system, and it will help to improve the spaces that are being delivered through developments over the coming years. Thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been useful for you. My name is Richard Heath, and you can find my contact details on our website. Thank you.